Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about
interesting questions about Stoicism. So we mean Stoic philosophy and the worldwide movement that includes hundreds of thousands of people who are practicing Stoicism, and we thought we would focus on this in part because it's what we call the season of Stoicism once again, which includes the big international Stoicon, a convention for people that are interested in Stoics, and that's online again this year. There's Stoicon X events all over the world. Dan and I have participated in them quite a bit in the past, and there's Stoic Week coming up where you can actually try out living like a Stoic for a week. And what we did is put out a call in social media for topics and issues and questions pertaining to Stoicism that people would like me and Dan to give our takes on as people who've been studying this for a long time and thinking about it, and organized, the Milwaukee Stoic Fellowship, which still exists and is going on quite well. So that's what we're going to do in this episode. We're going to kind of, do a Q&A. Dan proposed we could call this a Stoicism AMA, but you can't ask us questions because we're already recording this, right?
Right. And just so you guys know, if you want to know more about Stoicon, and you go to modernstoicism.com/Stoicon, and that's STOICON.
Yeah. I mean, and Stoicon is kind of a cool thing. There's a mixture of everything from, very academically oriented, deep into the text kind of stuff, to much more popularly oriented matters. And the theme this year is Stoicism and beauty, which I think is kind of cool.
Oh, the aesthetics of Stoicism.
Yeah, there you go.
And to, obviously, regularly there's the idea of Stoicism kind of being at least grouped in with the aesthetics, or the ascetics. I'm sorry,
ascetics.
Ascetics. But they're not aesthetic, and we can appreciate beauty and we can have nice things, and there's the beauty in interacting with other people in virtuous ways.
Yeah, and Marcus Aurelius. He has this really cool passage where he talks about looking at the cracks in bread and the imperfections in it, and finding beauty in that, or in the lines on people's faces as they age, or even, no, I don't know if everyone would find this beautiful, the mouths of fierce beasts, like a lion opening its mouth up. And, if you have the right attitude, you can find that instead of terrifying, you can find it beautiful.
Right. And it's kind of one of the big ideas within Stoicism is reframing things from what you might have thought to something different. As long as you can reframe the way that you look at it, you can have a very different reaction to it when it appears to you.
I should mention, too, so we have done some episodes in the past on various exercises associated with or coming out of Stoic philosophy, and reframing them is one of them. So if you're interested in this, you can go into our back catalog and find a lot of cool stuff discussing philosophical practices, exercises, whatever you want to call them.
Right. And they definitely improved my life with many of these practices.
Mine too,
also,
yeah.
We call this praxis of taking a philosophical idea and actually putting it into practice with a very rigorous set of circumstances. And over time, just think of mindfulness, meditation, and Buddhism would be a praxis of theory and practice put together.
Yeah. So I think before we jump into the questions, just in case anybody is a bit confused about what Stoicism is, we probably have to say at least a few words about Stoicism as a philosophy of life. When you think about it, or let me ask you this, Dan, what's your elevator pitch of what Stoicism is? I've never put together a good one, but maybe you have.
It is a way in looking at the world in which you are not disturbed and can find beauty in the interactions and everyday occurrences.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. Some people say things like living in accordance with nature, which was an old slogan of the Stoics, but boy, does that mean a lot of different things to different people.
That's such an unpacking. It's like
There's another one that's kind of popular, which is the idea that moral virtue is the only true good.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's quite right. I mean, people do put that forward sometimes, but the Stoics didn't think that that was the only good thing. They talk about friendship, for example, and other good things. But it's pretty close. The idea that what we ought to be focusing on is our character and cultivating certain important virtues like justice or temperance or courage or wisdom. I mean, what else would you say is really central to it?
So, like, the word for virtue in Greek is arete, which is like excellence. And so I always talk about like to be a Stoic is to be an excellent human. And so like in Stoicism, we're trying to investigate what is an excellent human and then trying to comport our lives and our actions to being excellent.
Yeah, without a roadmap, and that's what the philosophy is providing us with, it's hard to make much consistent progress.
Right. And thus, Stoicism has a number of different disciplines, and logic is also very important for us to okay, how can we if we've got all these competing ideas of what the good is, how can you actually make an argument that can stand on its own 2 feet to say okay, well this should be what the good is.
It's interesting, too. I mean, before we get into the questions, and we should do that pretty soon, somebody like Epictetus, who's an important Stoic teacher, he is content to let people, if they say, I don't like logic, I just want to, practice things. He's like, hey, go ahead and try that. See how far that gets you. And then as soon as you start getting confused about stuff, then you can come back to school because we'll teach you logic here. And so I think there is an element to Stoicism of you have to let people experiment with it and fail every once in a while. And then they can pick themselves up and see why the classic formulations of things are set up the way that they are.
There's a story, and I can't remember if it's in Epictetus or in Marcus Aurelius talking about a student going to a teacher and it's like, I hate logic. And he's like, okay, well, if you can prove to me that you don't need logic, then you won't have to learn logic.
Well, I think that is the same student we have in mind. Epictetus has a lot of great zingers, and it's it's due to his own student Arian, who wrote this stuff down, picking what must have been the best conversations with him, out of a selection.
If you want to laugh at some ancient Stoic writings, then Epictetus is definitely your guy. He's got constant things like, oh my god.
Yeah, and he's not like a stand-up or something. They're not jokes.
No.
It's just the way that he actually talks to people and the startling, holy crap, did he actually say that?
Yeah.
is often quite funny. And he jokes about himself as well,
Yeah. And that's one of the practices that we talked about earlier is, learning how to laugh at yourself, to say oh, that guy, he's calling me a bum and that I smell bad. Well, he doesn't know me at all well enough, because if that's all he said, then, he could have said this and this and this and this.
Those are the least of my worries.
Right. I don't care about those.
Well, should we jump into taking some of these questions?
Yeah, what's the first one there, Greg?
Okay, so Harold Kavli asked, what are some of the big things people tend to get wrong when they're encountering Stoicism for the first time? And I think this is a great question. Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
I guess the colloquial word for Stoicism in the English language now is to be someone that is unemotional, that they've stuffed all their emotions down to, that British stiff upper lip, and that is just about the farthest from the truth, because that is ignoring emotions, whereas the ideas in capital S Stoicism is that you are so in tune with why you are actually having these feelings in the first place that you can look at them and not be disturbed by them when they come about, that they are good sources of information about a situation, but that you should not let them take the reins from you.
You know, and I think there's a broader issue there. Stoics would never suggest to you that if you're confronted with some sort of reality, you should ignore that reality or distort it into something that it isn't, right? So when, we were talking about reframing is not like lying to yourself and making believe that things are great when they're not great. It's finding ways of looking at something that are actual possible objective ways of understanding the situation that you're just kind of leaving out. It's deliberately shifting focus from one interpretation to another.
Right.
What else? What are some other misconceptions?
Sometimes people think of like a Stoic as Spock. If you're familiar with Star Trek,
right.
Spock is sometimes referred to as a straw Stoic, the purely logical, no emotion reacting guy. Although if you actually watch the original series of Star Trek, he reacts emotionally a lot.
He's very passionately attached to logic, isn't he?
Oh yeah. To the point where it blinds him a number of times. That's a recurring trope for Spock. But yeah, the idea that is the ideal of a Stoic is really incorrect, as well as the ancient Stoics are described as happy and jovial.
Right.
And so to think of someone as dour like that would be a really poor description of what a capital S philosophical Stoic would be.
Yeah. I think one of the things that people often get wrong as well is they'll go out and they'll find some quotes, or they'll read a blog entry, or they'll read like a short secondary literature book and not read like actual Seneca or Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. And they'll pick up a few bits and pieces here and there and say, okay, I understand Stoicism now. It's this proposition and this proposition, when really it's like an entire network of ideas that were developed over hundreds of years. So they're going to be complicated. And so I guess we could summarize this by people think that Stoicism is simpler to express and wrap your head around than it actually is. And the one other thing I'll add to that we've already brought up a little bit, the experiential or practical element. If you want to understand the concepts, you really have to put them into practice and see what they do in your life. It's one thing to understand them cognitively. It's another thing to integrate them into the way that you talk to people, or handle your emotions, or just make decisions in life. And then when you do that, it's sort of like climbing up a hill. You can see the top of the hill before you climb up it, and then you climb up the top of the hill, and now you can see a lot further. And maybe you actually see that, well, I'm actually at a plateau, and this goes on for miles, and now I'm going to walk on level ground. Or maybe there's another hill that's even bigger that you couldn't see before. And so if you're not putting in the time and the work and continually growing, you're probably not going to get as much out of it as somebody who's just collecting quotes and then looking at them on their calendar or on their phone or something like that.
Yeah, that's why there's a number of places. I know that Massimo Pigliucci and Greg Lopez put out a book on Stoic practices. I actually have a copy, a handbook for new Stoics.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's a good resource to find something, and it's set up 52 weeks, and you can do something for a year if you want to, or if you want to just go and pull out of those and practice them. But the idea is, just as we will have here for the week right before StoicCon. Is it right after the Stoic Week is?
Stoic Week this time is a little bit separated. It's in November.
Okay. But Stoic Week is a time for new people to actually try to practice some of the Stoic practices in at least a regimented way. That sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of external motivation and structure to allow you to actually do these things and see if they actually produce any benefits for you.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next one?
Oh, absolutely.
So this is from somebody on Twitter, and she has a pretty funny moniker, Lydia the Sweary Stoic and Heroic Coach. And she says, how not to get sucked into the crap show of the world while still being aware of the crap show of the world. So, she's asking, how do you actually do that? And I think it's a great question, because one of the things that it's actually presupposing is that the world is kind of a mess. And I mean, you could say that from a classic Stoic perspective. You could say, well, it's all harmony. It all does make sense. But that's not actually what like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius are telling you. They'll say, yeah, people are screwed up, man, and they make dumb decisions. And Marcus will actually say, not only do they do that in the present, they've been doing that for age after age after age, and they're probably going to do that long after you're dead. So how do you... And so I guess the question is like getting at, how do you see the world as it is, which is an imperfect, messed up place, without letting that get to you?
Yeah. Like, Marcus Aurelius, the meditations are a little notebook to himself, like trying to like make sure that he's doing his practices and being able to see the world in a better way.
Yeah.
And one of them that comes to mind is him like sitting there is like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna like sit in your bed with your covers over your head all day? Like the bees are out there putting their world together, all the other animals are putting their world together as best they can. Why are you gonna sit here and not actually do the work of a man? Do your stuff. And the other part of this is directly to trying to not let the ways of the world or the crap show of the world get you down, is because the world is an external, and we shouldn't have our well-being, our equanimity be disturbed by the state of affairs of the external world. It's good to try to make the world better, but the motivation shouldn't be the state of the world at the moment. It should be a new source of motivation with a source from within yourself. That I want to be an excellent person. What does an excellent person do? The excellent person doesn't get disturbed because there are some setbacks. You do what you can do.
And allowing yourself to get upset over things that maybe don't matter as much, or maybe they do matter, but they don't matter to the degree that we ascribe value to them, that gets in the way of what you're just talking about, of like fulfilling our roles and our duties to other people, or thinking about how to improve our own character, right? Because it takes us in a different direction, and it consumes our time and attention. And I think that a Stoic doesn't have to say, "Hey, everything's cool. I'm great with this." They can actually say like, "Oh, this thing that's happening over here is really evil or unjust or terrible." They don't have to expect that everybody else views the world in a Stoic way, but the trick is how do you take on that realization, but remove the sting, you could say, right?
I've written about this a little bit in the past, and I call it like the Stoic trap.
Oh, let's hear about that.
And so the idea here is that, like, within Stoicism, it's like, okay, these things are externals, but then like almost everything's an external. And so if everything's an external and doesn't actually have value in and of itself, then people are like, oh well, that bad thing's happening, doesn't matter. It's external, and then you can get into this place where you kind of really nihilistic, nothing matters, and thus you have no motivation to do anything, and you have to change because usually before you kind of like take the Stoic mindset, the the external world and the things that are happening to them are the things that matter the most. And so if things are bad then things are bad. Whereas in a Stoic mind view, it's I can try to be the best person I can be, and that's my new motivation to try to now put the world in order as best I can.
Yeah, at least the little bit of it that we have some, not necessarily control over, but say involvement or influence over, right?
Yeah. So Kyle Cunningham has a question. Is there a clash between Stoic concepts and the modern world that mean we need to adjust our Stoic ideas? For example, social media and how to manage it. Yeah, what do you think about Stoicism and social media?
I mean, I think that Stoicism has plenty to tell us about social media. I don't think that social media, by its sheer existence, now, and it not having existed back in the time of the classic Stoics means that like we have to change Stoicism because we've encountered this new thing. I think you just take a look at, what people like Seneca or Epictetus have to say about our interactions with other people, and you adapt it to social media, right? I mean, if you think about it, social media is really quite new. It didn't exist when I was a kid. It's, 20 years old, perhaps? I mean, maybe we could say it's a little bit older if we want to think about websites that no longer exist, or we want to count BBSs as social media. I mean, what do you? Sure. I mean, you know more about the tech stuff than I do. Would you say a BBS is social media or not?
Sure.
Because you interact with people, right?
Yeah. I don't know. This reminds me of Seneca talking about either going to the games or going to the bathhouse. That you shouldn't be worried if you get jostled and overhear things that you might not like to hear if you're going to go to a public place and be with other public people. See, these are the things they talk about reframing it and thinking of it as a festival. Instead of like this negative thing you might have to interact with all these people. It's like, just reframe it as a festival. And I was like, in a festival, you have to interact with people, but they're all doing something like positive, and there's a road to progress down, and you can change your reactions to that.
I was kind of thinking of a passage from Epictetus where he talks about news, and he says, strictly speaking, news isn't good or bad. It just, the events that are being narrated are what they are, and then it's what we invest them with that makes them good or bad to us. And one thing that social media does is it makes us kind of curious about, what are other people saying? What do they think about stuff? And, we don't have to care, actually. We can log in and do our little thing and say, that's interesting that people say these things, and then get out. I mean, you could say that maybe we should avoid wars with people on social media, but we could say the same thing about shouting at your neighbor across the hall. You could do that just as easily in real life, right? Or yelling at people on the street. You don't need social media necessarily to be a jerk.
Right. And so like this already fits in pretty well. Like, okay, what does social media like do that's kind of like new? Is that it kind of hijacks our the fact that we are social creatures and that we desire approval from our peers. But the problem is that our peer group used to be like, 200 people at most. And now it's tens of thousands, and all of a sudden, your brain hasn't developed in a way that should be able to take in the negative or positive feedback of tens of thousands of people. It's just not how we developed as a species. And but if you take some Stoic concepts that your reputation isn't a good or a bad, it isn't external, it is not up to you. Then once again you can like try to diffuse that situation at its very beginning.
I'm laughing because one of the goals of a lot of people in social media is to have a viral post, a post that people will look at, respond to, and then repost, and it will gain a lot of traction, right? And there's something like success leading to success with these. And I have had a few viral posts in my life, mostly on Twitter. And the one that I had most recently, it was the dumbest thing, and I've like posted, I don't know, tens of thousands of tweets at this point, because I've been on Twitter since I like 2008 or 2009. And it was just me responding to somebody else who'd said something about Hegel videos. And I retweeted it and said, I've shot a few of them, or I've done a few of them myself. And then somehow people like glommed onto that, and they're like, yeah, he has, and not a lot of people had anything to say about it. They just kept like reposting it. And I was like, of all the dumb things, I mean, I've said things that are interesting, maybe even a little profound from time to time. Why didn't any of those go viral? Why did this stupid remark go viral? And then I thought to myself, well, at least it's not anything bad. Like, I'm not going viral because I went into an expletive laced rant out in front of Quick Trip or something like that, and somebody was filming. So, yeah. But I think you're right that social media, it doesn't radically change the game, but it faces us with new problems. One of which is, like you said, it does hijack our systems. And so what would a Stoic say? Well, you know that, so be on guard against it, right? I mean, don't be a dummy. If you know that, if you're walking through, like, you're like Indiana Jones and you're in I forget which temple. Is it the Temple of Doom where it's all the snakes, or is that Raiders of the Lost Ark?
There's
snakes in multiple
snakes in
ones.
Several of them.
Because he doesn't like snakes. So if you know you're going to walk down a hallway full of snakes, I don't know, shine your flashlight or try to avoid stepping on them, right? I mean, it's not rocket science, as we say.
Right. And the one other thing we didn't quite hit on here was that concepts in the modern world. Yes, we know more. That's great. Like the Stoics are, will regularly talk about understanding things, that we have impressions of the world. We see things with our experiences and our senses, and we take them in and we try to make a really good understanding of it. And they talk about like what is understanding and knowledge with this open hand, closed hand, and hand over the fist. And as we know more about the world, we have a better refinement of, like, physics, or how, biological systems work, how social systems work. And with that, we have better understanding of the world, and we can make better decisions about how we should react to these things because we know more. I guess, like, Seneca has a really bad take on earthquakes from way back when.
Right.
And, we only learned about plate tectonics about 100 years ago. And so,
if that, yeah.
We have a new thing. It updates our model of the world, and now we can make better decisions about how to be excellent in that world, now knowing new stuff.
Well, this is a good segue into another one that got asked by Jackie Friend. How about discussing the concept of a conscious and providential universe, what this means, or how this applies to us as Stoics? This is a reference to ancient Stoicism, because they actually did believe that sort of stuff. Does the science support anything like that in your view?
Not that I've seen. If it is, it's outside the world of observation.
Okay, yeah. So it would be sort of like a faith commitment then, rather than...
I kind of see him.
Yeah.
This is actually like an ongoing conversation between, modern Stoicism and the traditional Stoics, and more power to them. I'm not a traditional Stoic. And I also will happily incorporate other ideas from other schools of thought if they seem to be good. But yeah, this idea that yes, we all have a piece of the divine, or the universal logos that is pneuma or pneuma, that is the animating portion of us, and that is the source of our reason as humans, is a very cohesive story. It's internally consistent.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to, as far as I can see, hold up to the observational scrutiny.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Marcus Aurelius, at a number of points in his meditations, will say the universe could be arranged the way that Stoics think. So it's providential. There's some sort of like plan to things, and it's for the best, and it's rational. Or it could be Epicurean atoms, which means just random stuff, like sort of like what we tend to think about today, right? Following physical laws that produce this really cool universe that we're in, but there's no like overarching intelligence running it. And Marcus says it could be either one of these, but that doesn't mean a thing as far as like me actually living my life as a good person. Even if it is just random stuff, I'm not disabled from behaving like a virtuous person. And I think that's really great, because clearly he does think that there's a providential ordering, but he's willing to say, yeah, I mean, even if there isn't, that's not the point. It's sort of like these people, and I'm not saying that this is an exact analogy, so I don't want people to get me wrong, but there are people out there who are like, oh, if you take God out of the equation, then there can't be any morality. And you're like, wow, I don't want to walk down a dark alley with you if that's really what you think, because so if you don't believe in God, now you're like, lie, cheat, steal, murder, rape. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe you could just be a good person.
Right?
Yeah.
Personally, I do all the raping and murdering I want. None.
Yeah, there you go.
Like, I don't have a desire to do that. I don't have to have something else tell me it's bad to not want to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what they're confessing is that they actually would do it. They want to do it. And all that's holding them back is some scary guy in the sky who'll smite them if they indulge their appetites. I mean, yeah, I don't care what a person actually is committed to in terms of their cosmology. If I can count on them not to do bad stuff, that's really great, And
I think that was a Hitchens quote. So.
Oh, was it?
I think so, but I'm not sure. But I want to give credit where credit is due.
What do you want to? Which one do you want to tackle next?
Yeah.
I mean, one that I actually think is quite interesting, and I'd be really curious to get your take on this, because it's a little bit cynical. Mm-hmm. It's from Andy. Do you think that the idea of focus on all the segmented applications of Stoicism to roles we occupy and professions we choose are necessary? It often feels a bit like over-marketing or a quick way of selling books, offering life hacks, advertising conference tickets, or gaining followers than something that adds any actual value. And I will say there is a lot of stuff out there where it's like the Stoic XYZ, right? Mm-hmm. And you read the stuff and you're like, this person doesn't understand Stoicism at all. They've just like gleaned a few quotes, some of which are actually fake quotes, and they're putting them in there, and then they're like the Stoic lawyer or the Stoic politician, or I don't know, the Stoic manicurist or something like that. I think that that's a legitimate complaint, and I think there, as with any popular thing, there's people who jump in basically to grift and make some money and try to get some prestige out of it, some juice for themselves. But those are all externals, right? So these are people who are maladapting Stoicism in a way that shows they don't understand it, because they're basically taking a great philosophy and trying to turn it into a driver for their worldly success, usually without much success either,
Mm-hmm. I find the marketers are going to market, and the business majors are going to business, and if they find a niche that feels like that's going to work for them and make some money, they're gonna do it. I might not agree with it, but I guess it's sometimes annoying if it gets things diluted and it gets people set on the wrong path. There's and I'm not going to disparage all of them. There's going to be some good people that are going to be there. They might not be the most scholarly, but they can maybe bring people into oh, this might be an interesting philosophy that I want to get more into. I don't know. Once again, it's a little bit of an external, and they're going to do their thing. I guess if I feel so
outraged
about it, then I guess I could put out my own book that's try to be better, and hopefully it catches on. But I'm not going to be
what you're articulating is actually a good Stoic perspective on that. I don't control other people's, desires and plans and stuff like that, or marketing campaigns. That's their business. And, if they're doing something wrong, like misrepresenting what Stoicism is about, or making claims oh, you just do these 10 steps and your life is going to be amazing. It's probably enough for me to say, well, that's not quite true. I don't have to go and burn up every copy of their books.
Right. And
which would be kind of irrational, right?
And if they're going to say you do these things and your life is going to be amazing, from what perspective? If you say oh, you're going to get wealth and privilege, that'd be antithetical to the ideas in Stoicism. It's you trying to be a good person and also being happy, to love fate, to amor fati, of the world that you live in. And sometimes it's going to suck, and sometimes it's going to be great. And you should love both of those things, because you are in this world and you're experiencing it.
Yeah, that's a good perspective on it. Which one should we take on next?
Let's do Kathy O'Connell.
Okay.
I'd like you, if you haven't already, to discuss women and Stoicism and how our practice of Stoicism differs in light of our lives and biologies.
So that's an interesting one. In Stoicism Today, which is the online blog of the modern Stoicism organization, there was actually, and we'll put links to this below, there was an online seminar that brought in a whole bunch of women to talk about Stoicism, what they thought Stoicism, had in terms of prospects for women, whether it needed to be updated in certain ways. And it was quite good. There were a lot of different perspectives, and I think that's a great resource. Can
you
go
talk
ahead.
about one or two of them that you thought were particularly interesting?
Yeah, there is some misogyny in classic Stoicism because it's part of the culture, right?
Right.
So Seneca will say things like a person who is failing morally is effeminate, right? And we can easily say, okay, he's mixing some things up. We don't have to use that language anymore. Or in the older translations, quite often, the Latin term homo, which is gender neutral, or the Greek term anthropos, which is also gender neutral, is always translated as man, right? And we can say person instead of that. And I think that's a great strategy. We want, we should want to be inclusive and not say, well, Stoicism is just for the dudes, man. It's not really for women. And then Andy, who asked one of these questions earlier, said, I am, I think that Stoicism is great for women because women are people. It's not great for women just because they're women. It's because we're all human beings. And now Catherine is asking about in light of our lives and biologies, and we can say that, there are differences in biology. They're not absolutely determinative. It's not like there's women brains and men's brains or anything like that, the way that some people like to pretend with pseudoscience. Lives do vary because culture varies, but I think, a contemporary Stoic would want to be egalitarian and say this needs to be something that can be equally valuable for men and for women.
Yeah.
What's your view?
It comes back to, I don't know, I guess Musonius Rufus, which we only have a few things about it, but he talks about this specifically in should women be taught philosophy? And he's yeah, they have the capacity to reason, just like every other person has the capacity to reason. And if you nurture that, then it can flourish just like any other person.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
within Stoicism, we see our capacity for reason as like our most important feature as a human. So yeah, like in that case, that is our most important feature. There might be, people that are stronger or weaker in any number of different like talents, and if they want to do those things that they are talented at, good, do those things. But our ability to reason is not something that is reserved for only one of the sex. And they obviously, like, there's a number of people that are at least referred to as potential Stoics that are women in the ancient world, but we have almost no writing or about from them, and little writing about them. But there's a whole bunch of really interesting modern women that are talking about and working in Stoicism. And if you're gonna like look for people to read or to actually be interested about, I would go with them. Like there's a number of them, Karen Duffy, Shannon LaBelle, Nancy Sherman. There's a lot of them that are out there in the space that are looking for are seeking the Stoic path in a much better way. And I guess I'd say, with translations, a lot of them, especially the ones that are publicly available, out of copyright, are these kind of older things, and Seneca will often refer to things as womanly. I think Epictetus also does that.
Yeah.
And we can use better words that are actually closer to the description of what they actually mean, without having to bring the gender directly into it.
Yeah, and sometimes we have to say they're just wrong. Like Epictetus will say that a man ought to have a beard, and if he doesn't have a beard, he's not really a man, And you look at that and you're like, well, I mean, what about guys who can't grow a beard? Or, what about cultures where, until the 1970s, and it was kind of a subculture thing then, if you were a guy, you were clean shaven, unless you were some, weird egghead or something like that, right? You also wore a hat all the time, too. Does that mean we have to wear hats constantly?
Right.
I think some of this is culturally driven, and we just have to, put it aside, you know?
And that's one of these other things is Stoicism isn't a dogma. You don't have to follow exactly what they are. This is a conversation over centuries, and we can update it because we have, as we were just talking about, new information about the world. We have a better understanding of the world, and thus we can make better models and decisions based on those models.
Yeah. Here's a question, and it's one that we have a list, and this is kind of far down on the list, but I think we actually should talk about this one. This is from Toby Kelsey. Should Stoics proselytize or just lead by example? What do you think about that one?
Like, this has gone back and forth, and I don't know. I am torn. Like, there's nothing in the ancients will talk about, like, hey, don't tell people about the stuff. Show it. Like, does the sheep show its crud in its mouth to the shepherd, or does it show it by growing a nice fleece? And so also, like, people that are proselytizing are usually really annoying, and they're also often like the people that are new to it. It's like, oh my god, I found this thing and it's amazing, and I want to share it with you. And like, I guess, I was at least a little bit guilty about that at some point in my life. I've tamped that down, but I think maybe an idea like they had these Stoic schools in the past, and like it's not exactly proselytizing, but there was a place for people to gather and actually talk about these things and potentially even learn about it in a more regimented way.
So that's it. I think it's a false dichotomy, because you've got on the one hand just like keeping it to yourself, leading by example, showing other people that you're actually following the program, let's say, right? And then you've got way over here at the other end, proselytizing or evangelizing. And then I think in the middle, you do actually have like teaching to people that want to be taught, or offering informational workshops where you're not pushing it, but saying, well, here's an idea that you can consider. Or, a friend comes to you and they're like, oh, I got this problem. And you're like, well, here's some ideas that could actually help you out. And maybe you don't even tell them it's Stoicism. You just say, some things are in your control, other things are not. And if you mix those up, you're going to be unhappy. You don't have to say, well, this is Epictetus and Caridian 1 or something like that, right? So,
or if they're like, big into Christianity, that you can like give them the Serenity Prayer.
Right.
Like that's that's a core Stoic idea. It's also been adopted by another philosophy and religion.
Yeah, and I think you're right that proselytizing is a bit obnoxious. And so it could be good-hearted, like you were talking about. You find this thing that's really working for you, and you do want to share it with other people, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the original sense of evangelism. It means good news, and you want to share this good news with other people that you can unscrew up your life. In this case, not that the Messiah is coming or something like that, but you've got this thing that'll work for you. And then I think there's a lot of people who proselytize because that's the way they think that people ought to behave. That you want everyone to be on your team, and that's much more obnoxious, right? You can be like, okay, buddy, you got this thing and it's working for you. That's nice. That's not too bad, right? Mm-hmm. But we all have to be doing the same thing because I'm doing this thing now. That's really off-putting.
Yeah, and it's not Stoic because doing that is trying to force something that is not entirely in your control. It's like, that's have true. To do this.
Right.
It's like, here it is. And I guess, I believe it's Epictetus talking about, like, hey, you see someone making a wrong choice, go and tell them that they made a wrong choice, but leave it at that. Like, you can help them to know it, you can teach them, but you can't force them to do it.
Yeah, and I think the leading by example, there is something to the providing a consistent example that is important. If you see somebody who's preaching Stoicism, but then they blow up and yell at people who are vulnerable to them, okay, they're not being a very good Stoic then.
Right.
Like if you go to Stoicon and the person in charge of it is all stressed out and things aren't working out right, and this has happened at Stoicons, right? What is their demeanor like? Are they like, well, we got problems here, but the world is imperfect and I think we can handle this and maybe we have to switch stuff around? Or are they knocking chairs over and they're like, I can't believe it, it's all gone to crap, One's Stoic, the other one isn't.
Right. So let's see. What is another good question here? I think Toby Kelsey has one that I really want to talk about, which was, how can the Stoics' approach to fairness, responsibility, and community inform or improve local communities and modern politics? That
is a good one, right?
Yeah.
So what's your take?
We live in fraught times, right? Tribalism is kind of at a peak, and at least the Stoic answer to this is this idea of okiosis, and this is to expand one circle, we think of first ourselves, and then our close family, and then our close our extended family and friends, and you put them on these tiers that are smaller and smaller, and the closer they are to you, you'll do more and more for them. And then we have these out groups, and those are the others. And if you get into this kind of really in-group, out-group mentality, and it's like, well, I want good things to happen for me, and I want bad things to happen to the out group. And so if you go back to even Socrates, I think it's
in the Republic, he's talking with Polemarchus, says. Justice is doing good to your friends and doing evil to your enemies.
Right. And he summarily dismisses this because if the good is always the good, then for your enemies, if they hold the same idea, then the good is to them and the bad is to their enemies, who are you. And so if it's good for us to have good things, and also good for us to have bad things, depending on the point of view,
you got a contradiction.
You have a contradiction, so it can't be true. And so the idea within Stoicism, they came up with this word. It's called cosmopolitanism, and that means to be a person in the polis of the cosmos, or to be a member of the everything. To, instead of having these in groups and out groups, have at the very least a group that you say everyone's in. That there shouldn't be these out groups, and there might be, differences in bickering between subgroups, but we are all part of a single group. And if we can pull together there and never see anyone as an enemy, then that will allow us to, at least deal with people, especially if we're talking about in any sort of democratic institution.
Yeah, and especially in terms of local communities. I mean, one of the things that you do find when you get involved with, whether it's like a political group or a neighborhood, or pick whatever you want, there's always going to be people that you're like, well, they're not doing this right. They're in it for the wrong reasons. They just want to like control people, or they're, they think too much of themselves or stuff like that. Well, that's human. That's human beings, right? We're imperfect, and you don't have to like excuse it or say, well, I should be like that too. Instead, you can say, all right, how can I work with these people and not getting pissed off at them? That might actually be quite helpful, or not denigrating them because, they're not behaving in a stoic way. Stoicism can actually make you more pragmatic in getting things done. And this is what we see Marcus telling himself, tell yourself every morning, when I get up, I'm going to deal with ingrates, I'm going to deal with jerks, I'm going to deal with all these kind of people. But they're that way because they're mixed up about things, and I'm not. And so I have to behave in a different way than they do. And I think that's a great reminder. So that could be
they don't
quite
know
helpful.
What the source of the actual good is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I just want to expand on okiosis. This is it means a translation, direct translation is appropriation, and that means in this case is to appropriate the concerns and the needs of others into yourself more and more. Like, it doesn't have to be like your one entire now I have to just do everything for everyone else, but to at least acknowledge that there are needs of other people and that your actions will influence and react to them. And if you don't have any of their needs into your what you're thinking about and the decisions that you're making, then you will easily make decisions that will harm them.
I was just thinking that the Stoic virtues come in here as well. And you were talking about balancing people's needs, right? And that is, there's two virtues that are really concerned with that. One is justice, which means giving people what they deserve. And oftentimes we think they deserve less than they do. So maybe we have to get clear about what people actually do deserve. And then we don't always have infinite resources. Actually, we never have infinite resources. We don't always have enough resources to give everybody what we'd like to give them. So we have to figure out okay, where are the bus routes going to run, right? Mm-hmm. Who is going to be served by this initiative? And then wisdom is part of this, practical wisdom. And so Stoicism says we need to cultivate these. And I think courage is also needed too. It's difficult to stand up against pressure and have people tell you that you're, not only wrong, but a jerk for taking a political stance that you have. And you probably need courage to be able to stick to your guns,
Yeah, that courage, it's it's great to have an idea of what is the good, but if you can't actually get up and do the good, then what's the point? Hooray, I have the idea. I have the precognition of what I ought to do. If you don't do it, then you won't.
Yeah, courage has to do with persevering when things get tough, or facing your fears, or doing the stuff that's boring that you have to file all this paperwork, but actually doing it.
Yeah.
So, well, we might have time for one more. Which one would you like to go out on, you think?
I guess we'll do John Dwyer here.
Okay.
When, if ever, do Stoics fight back?
I mean, we have a great example in Cato, the younger, who fought against Julius Caesar with a guy who he didn't particularly like, Pompey, right? He joined as a Stoic to protect the Republic against what he viewed as Caesar's trying to, probably rightly so, to take power for himself and to subvert the order of things. And he fought in a civil war. So, I mean, there's a guy right off the bat who we could say fought back.
Not only fought, but like led. Like he
True, yeah.
He mustered an army to try to take out the forces of Caesar and the triumvirate.
I wonder if what he means is, when should you fight back if somebody is like being mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to other people that, like, if somebody's bullying your family members, you, as a Stoic, you should stick up for them, right? But should you stick up for yourself as a Stoic?
And this comes down to that idea of like the Stoic trap earlier. It's like, oh, someone's being a jerk to you. Well, that's an external. Okay, so what? And there's a kind of like this idea of like, what is it to be an excellent human is one thing, and then is, do you have any obligations as a member of your family or a member of the community? And so, like, what is the proper way to react to these things? And sometimes the proper way to react is to call the authorities or something, if that's where it's at.
Right.
If you happen to be an authority, that is your job. It is now your responsibility to respond or fight back in those situations in which you have been designated as the person to do that for that community. And so the question is, like, mostly, if you are going to respond or fight back, do it with virtue. Can you do it with temperance?
Right. Yeah.
If you're going to have to fight back, you should only use the amount of force that is necessary to solve the issue, and not to continue to beat the snot out of that person, because it's not going to. That's being untemperate.
Seneca has that whole book on anger, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he does consider in there is, do we need anger as like a fuel in order to get the things done that we need to do, like defend people that are counting on us? And his answer is, I mean, you can do that, but you're really playing with fire, and it's not a great way to go about things, because your anger might run out. It'll lead you to going too far. It's better to use reason. And the Stoics think that we can do the right thing motivated by practical reason, and we don't need negative emotions to get us to do that. And I think that's really quite different. It's a foreign idea for a lot of people, right?
Right. But at this point, we gotta end the conversation here, and we're going to leave you with the words of Seneca. We Stoics are not subjects of a despot. Each of us lays claim to his own freedom.